Welcome, I'm the Deadwood Jedi, and today we're doing another Raid Shadow Legends video. I'm in my account, obviously, today, and we are doing a unkillable team that I came up with, and let me just preface, I hate this team. I hate it so much, guys. It is a pain in the butt to make, it's a pain in the butt to use. Don't recommend it. That said, I know some of you are definitely going to want to try, so I figured I'd present it to you guys because this hasn't been seen before. It's pretty unique, and there are some things that I do like about it. But basically what we're doing is we're doing a Drokgul Unkillable team. So you guys all remember there was that Fragment Fusion champion Drokgul the Gaunt. This Ogrein guy, he has a lot of really cool abilities, including increased attack, increased defense, and a block damage debuff, all wrapped into one. There's a lot of caveats on how that's used, though, because you have to have less than 30% HP in order for that to proc. Not the worst thing in the world, but it gets harder because he also has a shield ability that, while that's a really good ability, it scales off of his HP. And then when it breaks, whenever the shield is broken or removed or runs out, you then get a heal on top of that, equivalent to the shield. So it can be very, very tricky to use Drokgul with an unkillable team. You have to make sure your HP is below a certain threshold pretty much all the time, at least before he's going to use that ability. And then with the shield in there providing some random healing, it becomes really difficult. I've struggled a fair amount with this composition. Affinity has a major impact on how much damage you take and how quickly, and that really throws off making this composition work. So I'm just going to throw this out there for you guys. I will put this comp on the site. It will be there as under Unkillable. Now, Drokgul's Unkillable. But I'm going to really recommend you guys probably look somewhere else. If this is something you want to run, I mean, I can't stop you from asking questions. Do not expect me to have the answers on how to make this work for you guys, because as you're going to see, even I struggle with this. I've been running this comp for a while now, and I am not 100% with it. So it is a bit of a challenge getting the timing of stuff right. I know if I spend a little bit more time, I could probably get it, finagle it, and make it so it's a more of a 100% type of comp, regardless of affinity, but it's a difficult thing to do. So just throwing that out there for you guys. Be aware of what we're stepping into here. That said, I think it is a very cool composition. I think it is really neat being able to make this work. And I feel like the speeds actually can probably lend itself to some other things in this game as it is. But we're going to be using Drokgul, we're going to be using Maneater, and we're going to be using 3 DPS champions. And the way I've aligned it, it is workable for Nightmare and Ultra Nightmare, but you do need to replace those DPS depending on the difficulty you're using. So it's not a perfect composition, but it's definitely something that is doable and achievable for most people out there. I say that, except that Maneater's got to be fast. I mean, real fast. So that might be the hurdle for many of you guys out there. That said, we know it's doable now. It's something that's achievable. And I feel like from this point on, we could look at making it work a different way. That said, let's go ahead. I'm going to show you the champions, and then I'm going to show you both runs, Ultra Nightmare and Nightmare. Let's go. Okay, guys, now as we go ahead, I'm going to show you the champions we're using for this run. We're going to start with Ultra Nightmare. Now, we have our Maneater. You can see speed's 287. It has to be very fast. The reason is we're trying to put him on a 5-3 ratio in combination with Drokgul. And Drokgul is going to be the slowest champion in this composition at 172. And by doing this, we allow Drokgul to go last after the stun, and we allow Maneater to go last after the first AoE, being able to block the debuffs for both the affinity clan bosses as well as the stun. This keeps us unkillable the whole way through. The DPS champions, we have Septimus, we have Rosin, and we have Frozen Banshee. Frozen Banshee is going to be the fast one at 208 speed. And what that's going to do is allow us to, just take their turns every single time and go between the Maneaters and Drokgul. And so this composition really is not my favorite, I'll be honest with you. One of the interesting things you're going to notice is there's 0 healing in this composition. We cannot have Life Drinker on our champions. We can't have Lifesteal on our champions. We can't even have healing as a skill for these champions. So you cannot use a bad Alcazar in this type of a composition. The reason why is because Drokgul will only place the Unkillable if you have less than 30% HP. So if you get any healing whatsoever, it's completely going to throw that off, especially when you take into account his shield, which provides some natural healing on its own. So Drokgul's really tricky to be able to tune, and I do not recommend using him, quite frankly. This was something I just did as kind of a challenge for myself, and because so many of you have asked about a Drokgul Unkillable team, but the fact of the matter is he's not great at this. It's very, very tricky to get your champions to stay alive and yet still have less than 30% HP on their champions. That becomes a bit of a challenge, and that's the only way his Unkillable works. So it took me a lot of times to get it. I've been running this composition for about 2 weeks now, and even when I've got it nailed down and working, it still fails sometimes. You know, I had to think about a few different things, including the fact that if Drokgul's HP is too high, then his shield becomes too big and the healing becomes too much, and that throws off the composition. It's important that your champions don't have, or either they have to have a lot of defense or not too much defense, because they do need to get as low as possible quick in order for this to work. What ends up happening for me is I end up manualing these runs for somewhere like 10 turns or something like that. 10, like turn 10, turn 13, turn 15, all the way up to turn 18 sometimes, especially with affinities that can really throw it off. It actually made it very difficult. And interestingly enough, even though when you fight a weak affinity, when you're weak affinity to the boss, so in this version here, Rasen's weak affinity to this clan boss, well, he's not going to land his debuffs as often because he's going to automatically miss some of the time. But he's also going to he's going to die really really quickly in comparison to how he usually goes. What actually becomes more difficult are champions like Frozen Banshee, who's strong affinity, because they take so little damage. It's hard to get them to a point where the Unkillable buff actually works before the clan boss kills them. And you can see right there, Rasen already died. This is a super difficult composition to work. I'm including that run where we failed because I want you to see I've been doing this for, like I said, 2 weeks, and we still failed. And we do it not just once. I do it probably about once a day. I'll have one run at least that will fail, and sometimes I just have to do it over and over and over again until I can get it to actually work. I'll even manual when the shields from Drokgul go up sometimes in order to mitigate the difference in HP and shield damage, because if they have more than 30% HP after the stun, we're screwed. We're not going to be able to get that block debuff up from Drokgul, and it's going to mess everything up. Now there are positives with Drokgul. He puts an increased defense and an increased attack buff. That means I can use Rasen and I can use Septimus, and they're both benefiting. That's a really unusual thing and really strong ability. In addition to that, those shields do provide a counterattack, which gives us a whole nother attack. That makes Frozen Banshee much more viable in this composition than she would normally be in an Unkillable team. So there are a lot of benefits to using Drokgul on your team. If you're going to bring Drokgul, I think he's going to be best for earlier levels. Brutal, Nightmare, and earlier. And when I would build him, I think there's two distinct ways. You build him either with very high HP, in which case you make his shield as tanky as possible. It's not a huge shield even with that, but it'll provide a little bit more damage mitigation for you, and it provides healing afterwards, which is actually can be pretty clutch for surviving a little bit longer. The opposite to that is building with very little HP. Build him high, like a traditional clan boss team. But what that means is the shield's going to be small, which means it's going to break easier, which is going to give you that counterattack ability a lot sooner. Now, you're probably talking about a total of maybe 3 or 4 counterattacks at most that you would be gaining by doing that. So it's not a huge significant difference, because at a certain point, it's going to break regardless. Besides which, it lasts for 3 turns, so it's not too much of a problem. But you can see here, Frozen Banshee has too much HP, no Unkillable, no block damage, and we die again. So this is a run I did a lot more recently. You can see the affinity changed. It's a lot more favorable to the champions we have, and it ends up being a successful run here. Now, to set this up and actually run it, you're going to want to do A1 with Maneater to start, because you need to use his unkillable ability right here. Turn count 1 between the AoEs. That's when you're going to want to use that unkillable ability. From there on, it is in cycle. It'll come up every 5th attack, which will come at this point every time. Drokgul doesn't go on that first turn because he's slower than the clan boss. So what you're going to want to do is you need to wait all the way till after the stun to use that block damage, the increase attack and increase defense ability. Up until then, you can use his shield, you can use his A1 ability, all of that's fine. Now, if you're having real trouble getting your champions to get low enough in health, or stay alive at the right spot, you can use that shield to manipulate it, because the shield does provide some additional healing, which means that sometimes having the shield up can actually be a detriment. So an easier way to set this up sometimes is actually not to use the shield ability and just manual it all the way through. But I found that depending on the champion, how they're built, whether they're defensive or offensive, it can take you all the way to turn count 15 or so to be regularly having your HP getting wiped out by the clan boss, and that becomes the only safe spot to really use that shield. Up until then, there is a little bit of RNG involved that can throw things off, so you definitely want to be careful with that. One more time, I just have to tell you guys, I do not recommend doing this comp. It's very difficult to set up. You're using aspects of HP and HP percentages. You have to have an idea of how quickly your champions die in order to be able to really make this work. And so it is very, very tricky. It does not work with block damage champions like Tower or Warcaster. You need someone that is unkillable, but you allowing your champions to still take damage. That is crucial, because the fact of the matter is, Drokgul won't put up the block damage buff if you have more than 30% HP. So if you want to use Drokgul just for the increased defense and attack, I think that's a great usage for him, honestly. You can use him for that, you can use him for his counterattack with his shield. I think that's actually a really good way to use him. I don't think he's going to blow your damage out of the water, but I think he can add something to it for sure. Maybe kind of, if you look at like using a Longbeard or something, it's not that different. I mean, you get a full-on counterattack. It's not ally attack, but it's pretty close to the same thing. Plus, you get those nice buffs for your team. That said, if you want to use them with the unkillable ability, it's going to be a bit of a challenge. I do recommend using Maneater. I think this is probably the best way to use Drokgul. I believe in theory you might be able to do it with Santa. However, Santa does have a continuous heal buff, so getting the timing of that right to make sure that your champions still have too little HP so that the block damage buff works, that can be challenging too, and you'd probably have to manual up until around turn 20 as well. So some things for you guys to think about. I'm gonna just go ahead and let you guys enjoy the run, and then after this I'm gonna go ahead and show you how we do this on Nightmare. So you guys can see it's still a 2-key Ultra Nightmare team, much like any unkillable team. If you bring in the right DPS, it's gonna be effective. One of the fun things about this composition is the Maneater and the Drokgul don't need to change speeds at all when you're going from Ultra Nightmare to Nightmare. You just have to bring in new DPS. So I'm bringing in Vizier, Suai Firstborn, as well as Aethar. And I found that on Nightmare, it's a much more consistent run because the damage from the clan boss is a lot steadier in growth. It doesn't jump as quickly as it does in Ultra Nightmare, and it makes it a lot easier to get your champions' HP levels to an appropriate amount consistently. Even then, occasionally it will get thrown off depending on affinities, but for me, this worked. Again, no Life Drinker on all our champions, but this does work just fine. There's not a whole lot different as far as the setup goes. The plan is still the same concept. You still want to use Maneater's Unkillable between the AoEs and Drokgul's block damage after the stun. Because everybody's going to be going first, or at least Drokgul and Maneater are, Maneater's going to use that A1. We're going to go ahead and allow Suai's going to get her first attack, and then Drokgul's going to be able to do... well, I screwed that up there completely. Typically, would go ahead and use the block damage buff on that first turn. Here, Maneater's going to get 2 turns right off the bat, so you're going to need to use the first one with an A1 or A2, and then the second attack right here, you're going to use the Unkillable ability. Now, he does outpace Drokgul right here off the start, so there is a little bit of delay. It's not different than with the Ultra Nightmare, same thing. Just on the first cycle, or the first 2 cycles, Maneater outpaces Drokgul. After that, though, it does fall right into sync, and it'll be unkillable for the entirety of it. So occasionally, depending on affinity, you might have to watch out for a stun, but you will block the debuffs, and that's really the important part. Just make sure you don't get slowed from green affinity. No one should be dying in the first 2 or 3 cycles anyhow, so if you don't get the block damage up at the right time initially, it's not going to be the worst thing in the world. And then mostly you'll just lose out on damage from those buffs. There you go, we got it on, and pretty much from this point on, we can full auto it. I do like to manual a little bit just to make sure we're in sync, but yeah, this run goes a lot easier than the other one does, than Ultra Nightmare. So let me let you guys sit back and watch. So there you go, guys. I mean, you can see it's as effective as any other unkillable comp. 2-key Ultra Nightmare, 1-key Nightmare. Even if you have a bad run, which believe me, I've had plenty of them, you still have like a spare key in there because we get 4 every day. You have a spare key in there to kind of make up the difference at one of those difficulties if you really need to. So it's a generally pretty solid composition. The only problem is not consistent, especially with Affinity. I died so many times, guys. And for me, with the champions I was using, Green Affinity was like my kryptonite. Just could not win against that consistently at all. Everything else we would do okay, but Green Affinity killed me. If this is going to be your team, it's definitely something where you can play with it and get it so that you have each champion ready for each affinity and you're set and ready to go, and you know exactly how long you have to manual, what the steps are to take to make it work for you, and so on and so forth. But it's a challenge, guys. I had my Drokgul with pretty low HP for him. And it made it a lot easier as far as that shield to make sure that it wasn't too massive. I did run it with a really high HP Drokgul, not as effective. It definitely posed some issues. When that shield breaks and your champions are healing up for more than that 15% because he has so much more HP than them, that can be really problematic. So you definitely want to be careful about using his shield and getting his HP too high for this. But Drokgul's, I think, is a decent champion. I don't think he's great, but I do think he does have a place in Clan Boss if you use him right with the right composition. The great thing is he prioritizes that increased defense and increased attack buff. So that can be consistent. Not as good if you really relying on, if you're like, ooh, I want to use that shield for my Clan Boss team. Not as good, right? Because that's not going to be prioritized, so it's going to be a little bit less frequent. It's getting harder and harder to find new compositions, but I'm trying to find some stuff. That said, I do feel like if you get a Santa working with Drokgul, I think that actually might be a really nice composition. Really lower the speed requirements down. Only issue is Santa's AI is kind of the opposite of Drokgul's. He doesn't prioritize the unkillable, so you're probably going to have to manual for a while in order to get that to click into sync. But I do imagine that at some point that's a composition that could work. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit that subscription bell, or sorry, hit the subscription button. Hit the notification bell so you do know when my next video is out. It's been a few days. I didn't have the best weekend, so I needed a little bit of time for myself. But that means I'm not always consistent with my videos. I mean, it's good. When I put something out there, you know I care about it. I don't put out garbage and trash as much as I can. So, you know, but hitting that notification bell lets you know when the video comes out so you don't miss out on it. So that's always important. Leave a comment down below what you guys think of this composition. If it's something you are excited to try, and oh boy, I can't imagine. Or if you think it's just a trash team, completely. It is an alternative, and I think that's kind of cool, and it's cool to see what we can do, even if it's not optimal or advisable. But that said, guys, hopefully you enjoyed this. Until next we meet, I'm the Deadwood Jedi.